Hey, good morning. What's happening? It's Robert Phoenix, broadcasting live from Fredericksburg, Texas, for another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. It is just about 10 before 9 here. Getting a little bit of a slow start, but we're off and running, and we got a lot of ground to cover today. Try to get as much as I can packed in. There were a few things, maybe one or two things I left out, but maybe we can get to them tomorrow. We have another show before we hit the Friday Farcast. So anyway, good morning. How is everyone? I hope everybody had a peaceful and deep sleep and experienced, who knows, visionary dreams, out-of-body experiences, time travel, all those wonderful things that can happen when we decide to close our eyes and go into deeper states of our experience. So let me check in. We've got a few people now showing up over on the YouTube side of things. Here we go. Shall we do our little morning wake up here? A little morning greeting. When we do, we have to turn back the pages of time. Here we go. Oh, I see Liz. Hello, Liz. And there's Shari and Christine and Chris and Steve. There's Ian. Hi, Lori. Nice to see you. Jenny Beasley. She's here as well. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Is there anybody else that we can bring into today's show? Looks like we have a bit of a small audience today. That's okay, because that means I'll have more time to work with all of you and have a wonderful, wonderful experience. Okay, enough of the romper room. But it's kind of fun, right? To go back there and remember those much more simpler days and simpler times. We are living in a different universe now, if you haven't figured it out yet. Timelines, moving through the galaxy. It's all very, very unusual, strange, and it's not going to get any... We're not going back. We're not going back. That's not happening. Okay? That's just not going to be taking place anytime soon. So, here's what I want to do now. I want to get into sort of the meat of the stories. But before I do, because, well, maybe I'll save it to the end today, because I'm going to cover a lot of heavy territory. Unfortunately, I have to, because that's just the way these things are. So I'm gonna save the Biden video until the end, because I think it's freaking hilarious. So I'll save that to the end. So one of the big news stories right now, today, as we speak, is the arrest of that guy. Does anybody know who that is? That's Ed Buck. Ed Buck is a major, big-time fundraiser for the Democratic Party. I'm making the runway for who's just got it. So Ed Buck has been arrested. I'm going to let you look at that for a while I read the story. So Ed Buck has been basically luring black men, some young, some not so young, into his crappy apartment in Los Angeles and getting them high on all kinds of substances, usually meth and probably something else, maybe Rufinol, methamphetamine, cheap, dirty highs, and then wind up taking advantage of these men. He's got all kinds of sex toys that he likes to bust out, and would you like to shove this up my ass, and all those wonderful kinds of romantic gestures that Ed Buck has in store for these guys who get entrapped. So let me read this. Okay, it's kind of a big deal. Ed Buck, the California Democratic mega donor, was arrested Tuesday and charged with operating a drug house. Probably could be charged with a hell of a lot worse, by the way, after a third man reportedly suffered an overdose inside his West Hollywood home last week. Okay, so I guess 3 strikes you're out the last guy that was there. And they've got testimony. They have all kinds of testimony. And so the first-hand testimony, nothing's happened to Buck. Well, finally, the straw might have broken the camel's back for now, but these guys are they're like rubber biscuits. They just bounce back. Buck has faced public scrutiny after two black men died from overdoses 18 months apart inside his home. It's interesting that they say black men. Black men, not just men, but black men. And this is not an indictment of black men by any stretch, but it's clear that they're establishing a pattern here. Buck is due in court Wednesday to respond to 3 counts of battery and injecting the alleged victim with methamphetamine on September 11th. It's a bad day. It's a bad day to have an alleged victim, Ed. Prosecutors wrote in court papers obtained by the Times that Buck used his position of power to manipulate his victims into participating in his sexual fetishes. These fetishes include personally administering dangerously large doses of narcotics to his victims, the prosecutors wrote, according to the Times. Seymour Amster. What a name is that? Seymour Amster. You think his nickname in high school was Amster the Hamster? Buck's attorney told Fox News that he would not comment on the arrest and said he's dealing with the issue. Amster has in the past defended his client, insisted he did nothing wrong. You got a lot of defending to do there, Mr. Amster. In July 2017, a young black man, Gamel Moore, was found dead of a drug overdose in Buck's apartment. An autopsy report said Moore died of a methamphetamine overdose. He was found naked on a mattress in the living room, which was littered with drug paraphernalia. 18 months later, 55-year-old Timothy Dean also suffered methamphetamine overdose. Prosecutors didn't file criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. Activists, however, called for his arrest. About time. In the most recent incident, Buck allegedly brought the man to his home earlier this month and injected him with methamphetamine. We got a little bit of a pattern here. About a week later, the man returned to Buck's home and was injected again. So the guy came back again. All right, now, that's a weird thing, right? So the first time, the guy kind of dug it, I guess, because he came back. He was like, I got to score drugs. Yeah, I need to get high. Well, there is that old dude who wants me to shove a dildo, a vibrator up his booty. I guess I'll go there. About a week later, the man returned to Buck's home, was injected again, and suffered an overdose, according to court documents obtained by KTL. Okay, so I think this guy Buck should be taken out of circulation. And that guy who went back a second time, he probably needs to be taken out of circulation too. The guy needs help. Buck is accused of thwarting the man's attempt to get help. The man fled the apartment and reportedly called for help from a nearby gas station. He survived but was treated. So he did get help, but he got help after the fact. Dude, you shouldn't have been there the second time. But, methamphetamine is a hell of a drug. Hell of a drug. Prosecutors are reportedly seeking bail of $4 million. KBC TV of Los Angeles reported that he faces up to 5 years and 8 months in state prison if convicted. Could you imagine Ed Buck in prison? He might love it. That might be a holiday for him. Don't you think? I mean, basically looking at his fetish for cheap drugs and men, African American men. We know what the statistics are in prison, unfortunately. I mean, that could be a really good deal for Ed Buck. See, I wouldn't put him in that kind of a situation because he'd just have a field day. It'd be like Disneyland for him. He should probably go to an Amish community and work on the Amish. You know, the Amish have a bit of a dark side, by the way. They have a bit of a dark side. Let's put it that way. There is like an Amish mafia. Like the Amish aren't all. They're not all. You know, sunshine and cows and Kelly McGillis from the movie Witness. Remember her? Remember how beautiful she was in that movie? And then she, wound up essentially becoming sort of a first wave defector from Hollywood, mostly because at that time, I believe she was gay, right? I mean, there was this rumor for a very long time that her and Jodie Foster were lovers. And, that was a time in Hollywood where all that stuff had to be kept under wraps. She was just apparently ahead of her time, supposedly. But this Buck thing is interesting, and it feels to me like long overdue. Long overdue. And I hope wherever he goes, he stays there for a while and has to deal with the reckoning of his internal script, because it feels like that's where a lot of people are anyway right now. We're in a reckoning phase. We're all dealing with our internal scripts. So whatever it is you have to deal with, whatever it is you have to face, your fears, your demons, your habituation, your patterns, it's all happening now. It is all happening now. This is the time of John Lennon's instant karma, for lack of a better term, although I'm not necessarily I don't believe in karma in a way that most people do. I think karma is a very, very complicated issue. A lot of us don't really understand it. But I do believe that we have contracts with people that need to be resolved, and we have contracts with issues inside of ourselves that we carry that must be addressed. They have to be addressed. And if they're not going to be addressed, guess what? They're going to come up. This is the time where it's happening. I'm just telling you. I'm telling you, because we have a golden opportunity to deal with these things. And it's not always easy, trust me. I get it. I understand it. But it's what's being called out for us at this point in time. And I think, here's what I think there's a lot of potential to do fourth and fifth dimensional magic, mostly fifth dimensional magic. I really believe that there is an opportunity, because that's what we're here to do. I mean, I think that was the model of the great teacher in the Avatar. And this was what he was essentially sharing with us, right? With the miracles and, the stuff like, the resurrection and, the reassemblage of his atoms, or however all that went down. That's all fifth dimensional magic. And I think that's where we can go. However, in order to do that, you've got to be clean as a whistle. You really have to be as clean as a whistle. You have to be as spotless as you can be, because when you get into that place, you're getting into a realm of power. And when you get into a realm of power, you have to have equal amounts of responsibility. That's just the way it is. So, we're on our way to the path of power, which is a good thing. But in order to get there, you've got to get your shit together. And it's not like, you're getting your shit together so you can go to Dave Ramsey's set in Nashville, Tennessee, and tell him what a good boy or girl you are for paying off your debt. I mean, I think that there's something to that as well. But there's another level also operating at the same time. So there we go. There's the Ed Buck morality tale for the morning. I think it's a good thing, because he can endanger other people. Now, some people would say, well, they're two grown men. So what if he goes over there and they're both doing drugs together, and there's some level of permission. The problem with that is that in a couple of instances, these guys have come, I think, wasn't there a death at Ed Buck's? Anyway, they come very close to physical termination and death. So people are at risk, and Ed Buck is endangering these men, and he is amplifying the risk. So, I mean, there's other things there too, right? Like, he's just not a good guy, and it takes major kind of piece out of the Democratic Party's canon, because he can get money. He's got power. He's got influence. He's been an untouchable. And not that I'm looking at this from a left or right deal, but it's just like a person who's just really unsavory, supporting a part of the system that probably would be better served by better people serving that system. Although that's probably not going to happen. All right, let's get into another. This is a really interesting thing. I just want to show this to you guys. This crossed my screen this morning, and this is the image for the table. Basically it's the equivalent of the English Supreme Court, right? So it's the Supreme Court of the United States. It's the English version. Check out their table scene here. Can you dig that? I mean, look at that. Look at that. That is mind blowing. That is totally mind blowing. So we have, obviously here we have the judges, the judges that sit right here, and then we have the people that are going to sit before the judges, and then we have the outer ring, right? Oh, this is so funny. This is so funny. And then the chairs look like they look like eyelashes, and the big table in the middle is the pupil. Look at that. Look at that. The all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye as it's nailed to the floor in the English Supreme Court. Symbolism is everywhere if you are willing to have a look at it. And of course, once you have a look at it and can define it, interpret it, the patterns begin to become very self-evident. Very, very self-evident. So interesting. I just wanted to share that with you. A little Eye of Horus in the chambers of the English Supreme Court. Right? Interesting stuff. Okay, so I'm going to get into two stories, and they're kind of related in some ways. One is a much longer story, and I think I'm going to go with the shorter one first, and then I'm going to get into the longer one. And the longer one is something that, if I were a teacher, I would say this is your homework, because it's kind of a big deal. All right, so let's get into the short story first. And this started to make news headlines yesterday. Across my screen, put this up on Facebook, and the visuals will speak for themselves. So here we go. This is in Minneapolis, and so they're trying to get this guy's cell phone. Okay, see this? Trying to get his cell phone. He's fighting back. I mean, this guy, look, he's got him down. This guy knows what he's doing. And all of a sudden, the rest of the jackals come in. Takes 3 guys to pull him off, right? And watch this one now. They hit him right in the face, square in the face. And then there's this. This is outside of the Twins Stadium, right here. Now, what you didn't see on that last one with the Twins Stadium, where they were punching him and rolling on him, is that they edited that video, by the way. That's like the PG version. There was a guy that rode his bicycle over that dude. And then in the second video, they clipped that. And what they did is that there was a guy that ran in while the other people were trying to take his cell phone. While he was trying to defend himself, there was a guy that ran in and took his cell phone. I want to go back. I just want to go back one more time and play this thing, because I want some interesting points here. So we're going to play it again. So I just want to show you the first scene here. So they're trying to get this guy's cell phone. He's not letting it go. He's not letting it go. He finally gets away, and he takes this one guy on, and then he takes him down. I mean, look at this. This guy is a freaking animal. But he's got 9 other dudes that he's got to deal with here, and they're not there to pull him off. So that he's, they can break bread and have peace. They're pulling him off so they can wail on him. This is in Minneapolis, by the way. And this started to hit the news screens. There's a Fox News has a much longer video clip of this. And I was talking with some people in Minneapolis on Facebook yesterday, and they basically said that part of the city is now a no-go zone. Like after dark, you don't go there. I'm going to just break it down. And if you find this offensive or hateful, I'm sorry, but it's not meant to be. I'm just, I'm filling out the roster. I'm just filling out the scorecard. That's a community of Somalians that have been brought into the United States. They are war-torn. They are traumatized. They are given white glove treatment from the time they get off the plane. They are being emboldened by Ilhan Omar, who basically says "fuck you" to the president, okay, because she represents that district. So there's a ton going on there, and none of it is good. The police force say they need 400 more officers. 400 more. What is the mayor willing to give them? 14. 14. Oh, you can have 14. Do you think 14? There were 14 people in that scene alone. Okay. Now, I'm not a big fan of adding, more cops, because what'll happen is that Minnesota will turn into Portland. Maybe it's already there, but it'll turn into Portland and basically say, yeah, you can't do anything with these guys. If you bust them, you're just going to have to let them go. You just have to put them back out in the street, because that's kind of where law enforcement is happening. That's where it's going. And I've talked about this before. So, the only real option here, and what's really interesting about that scene as well, or those scenes, in each and every one of those scenes, the guys with the phones, well, number one, if you didn't notice, they were white, okay? Not that there's anything really to do with it, but I'm just, again, filling out the scorecard here, filling out the roster, and they were alone, okay? They were alone. In each and every one of those other scenes, they were being essentially mobbed by, up to a dozen people, a dozen dudes. It's not a good scene. It's not a good scene at all. So what's the message here? Okay, the message here is that some form, and I'm going to use the word tribalism, and I'm going to use it in kind of a broad sort of term, right? I'm not referring to Africa, right? Tribalism is something that's transnational. That a certain form of tribalism is allowed, and it is enabled. While another form of tribalism, or another form of people gathering together and forming their own groups in their own community, is disallowed. And why is that? Because in the background, there is this tape running, this tape loop, white nationalist, white nationalist, white nationalist, white nationalist, neo-Nazi, neo-Nazi, neo-Nazi. And so that false narrative is basically put into play so that people who would like to gather together, start their own groups, have their own groups on campus, have their own holidays, have whatever they are, whatever they want, right? That tape loop going on and on and on and on is the soundtrack to disapproval for that kind of experience. And I'm not here, to support some sort of neo-Nazi bullshit or, Aryan nation stuff. But the bottom line is that if you're living in Minnesota and you're letting that shit happen to your people, you are just as guilty in some ways as the creeps and the perps that are enabling what took place on those streets. So the people of Minneapolis, if you have any spine whatsoever left in you, and you go out, you will not go out by yourself. Okay, this should be the number one priority. That if you go out at night, or if you go hang out, you cannot be the Lone Ranger. It's just not. This is not your version of Minneapolis. This is not your mother's version of Minneapolis. Okay, and unfortunately, this is going to happen more and more in the United States because of what's happening in the refugee program. I am not opposed to bringing refugees in, but this is not a smart way to do it. And how the system has basically morphed into, or socially engineered into. Let's be clear about that. Is that from start to finish, they're brought in, they're given white label treatment. They have apartments, they have EBT cards, they have cell phones. This is what's happening. And what they're not getting is they're not getting real indoctrination. Okay. Now here's the other deal, right? If you're an African American and you're living in Minneapolis, right, and theoretically, these are your brothers, you got some responsibility here. Unless, of course, you want to, burn the place down, in which case you may want to fly their flag. But you have some responsibility here. Like the African American community should go in there and say, look, we don't approve of this shit. Okay, we don't approve of this. We've lived here, we've worked hard here, and we put our time and effort in here. We get government subsistence here. Whatever. You got to go in there and straighten that shit out. And so this is a two-pronged approach here. So I'm not even coming at this from, I'm talking about people, giving a fuck, okay? You got to give a fuck. If you're an African American, you're in Minneapolis, that's just unacceptable. That is unacceptable, unless, of course, you're privately cheering them on, and that's a whole other discussion. And if you're a white American, you're living in Minneapolis, you can't let those people, you cannot go out alone. You can't leave them out hanging out to dry, like your mayor is doing. So this is a really important thing to kind of wrap your head around. I mean, it's a Band-Aid, trust me. But at the very least, it's an important Band-Aid because you got to stop it somewhere. You've got to stop it somewhere. And if you're coming from the African American side of things, there's probably less of a chance of being accused of being racist. Right? Oh, well, you know what happens when white people get together? They start zig-heiling and goose-stepping all over the place, which is a bunch of bullshit, okay? But you can't let those guys hang out to dry. That one dude, he took care of himself. That's the other thing. You got to know how to take care of yourself. Unfortunately, there was just way too many of those other dudes there. And they eventually took his cell phone. But that guy had the heart of a lion. Now, what else is going on? Oh, have you noticed that there's a big rush to disarm the populace? Okay, so just think about that for a moment. Let's just postulate, okay? Let's say that all of a sudden, one of those people in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which happens to be pretty liberal, to be honest with you, but it used to be a big hunting state. Well, let's just say, for instance, one of those guys was packing, had a gun, and they started to fuck around with him, and they started to steal his cell phone. Come in. What would he? All of a sudden, he pulled out a piece. What do you think they would do? They would scatter. They would just scatter. Okay? Just think about that for a minute. They would not stick around. They wouldn't stick around at all. So, and I'm not saying that you got to go run around and pull out pieces in people in Minneapolis. I'm just telling you that if the American populace is disarmed, and I don't care what color you are, that's your future. That's what you're going to have to deal with. I'm sorry to say. And and look, let's take the color thing out of it. Let's just whatever. It's a group of people who have been emboldened and have a set of values that are beyond anarchic. In anarchy, at least there's some personal responsibility involved. It's just for a cell phone. What happens if things get really hot? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? That was just for a cell phone. Those are just cell phones. Cell phones, people. This is a cause for alarm. And meanwhile, the Democrats are saying, these guns. We've got to take these guns away. We've got to take the AK-47s away. They'll never comment on that. They'll never comment on what we just saw. It's not going to be part of their debate platform at all. Okay. Meanwhile, they want to disarm the populace, and this is what a disarmed populace theoretically will have to deal with. So, people in Minneapolis, the African American community, you got to put your foot down. You said this is not what we do here. This is not what we do here. And you got to change the script. And so-called white American community, do not allow your brothers and sisters to just go out alone. That's what's happened here. With, unfortunately, I'll speak to the skin tone and the body that I'm in this lifetime, because this is the meat suit for this lifetime. Okay, because I understand that we're all universal beings. And this is the concretization and the manifestation of the eternal form in this experience. Let me just be clear about that, okay? That said, I'm like, okay, well, this is what life's dealt me, so I've got to deal with it from that perspective. Just as if somebody from another in another body say, well, I got born into this situation, I got born into this family, I got born into this so-called race, this so-called culture, whatever it is. And so you deal with what you've been dealt with. These are the cards you have. And so now from this perspective, this is how I'm seeing this. Okay? And I'm seeing it from the point of observation of somebody who's been deeply immersed in this culture for a long time. I've been here for 58 years, and the effects of what's taken place. And what's taken place is that this culture has been atomized. The families have been shattered, like broken glass. The values have been distorted because we have, I think, somewhere in our DNA, kind of this pull for empathy and compassion that has been exploited, and it's been, and as a result of it, our position has been marginalized over and over and over again, and it's a cautionary tale. Okay, it is a cautionary tale because this is just kind of one version of the experience, and I guarantee you, whatever happens in the future, that if there's another group and they have kind of their own strong beliefs or their own strong value systems, there's a really good chance that ultimately they'll become marginalized as well, because that's the game. It's about dividing and conquering, and separating out, and it'll just go right down the line until ultimately everybody's fucking demoralized. Nobody has any sense of their familial history, their cultural history, the planetary history, and people are just walking around like blank slates and being reprogrammed on the fly, and that's where it's all going. Okay, that's where it's all headed. So it's been, and I've been studying this now for quite a while, and the effects of this program are devastating, absolutely devastating, and that's across the board. Like if you go through the streets of Los Angeles, you go through the streets of San Francisco, and you did a random sort of survey of the homeless, right? If you did a census of the homeless, you would find that it is a multiracial experience. Okay, not any one group has got the claim to kind of being in the homeless zone. All right, and at the same time, what we've seen is the middle class, which is, let's be honest, has been primarily white for most of the 20th century, is starting to fall off. So sort of the bottom third of the middle class is getting into precarious situations, more so than they've ever been before, and it's devastating. It's devastating. I had a moment of epiphany last night, and this comes into the next story that I'm going to bring you. So that's like at the street level of what's taking place. Let me bring in what's happening at a higher level. Now remember, I'm just observing and commenting through this perspective at this time of my life, in this experience, this incarnation. This is what you're getting, my observations. Okay, just be clear. And ultimately, this affects everybody, and not just people like me. Theoretically, all right, it affects everybody, because everybody will have to deal with that version of what I showed you on the streets of Minneapolis, and this other version, which to me is probably, I can't even begin to break this down with the amount of time we have left. But this story crossed my screen last night, and this is a guy by the name of Paul Singer, and Paul Singer is an incredibly wealthy and powerful man. He is one of Donald Trump's biggest supporters. He's one of Donald Trump's biggest donors. Donald Trump has been friends with Paul Singer for a very long time. Now, I'm going to put this link in the show page today, because this is the story, I think, of the century. Now, what's really fascinating, Whitney Webb keeps showing up in a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing that's really just so on point. She lives down in Patagonia, and she writes for Mint Press, which you may want to check out. This story's almost, the scope is so broad here. What I'll probably do is I may just devote like a lot of this Friday to this one topic. So here it goes. How neocon billionaire Paul Singer is driving the outsourcing of U.S. tech jobs to Israel. I'm just going to read you a couple paragraphs, and I'm going to try to free associate here a little bit. With nearly 6 million Americans unemployed and regular bouts of layoffs in the U.S. tech industry, Major American tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and Intel Corporation are nonetheless moving key operations, billions in investments, and thousands of jobs to Israel, a trend that has largely escaped media attention or concern from even American first politicians. The fact that this massive transfer of investment and jobs has been so overlooked is particularly striking, given that it is largely the work of a single leading neoconservative Republican donor who has given millions of dollars to President Donald Trump. To make matters worse, many of these top tech companies shifting investment and jobs to Israel at record rates continue to collect sizable U.S. government subsidies for their operations while they move critical aspects of their business abroad, continue to lay off thousands of American workers, and struggle to house their growing company branches in Israel. This is particularly troubling in light of the importance of the tech sector to the overall U.S. economy, as it accounts for 7.1% of total GDP and 11.6% of total private sector payroll. So really what that means, let me just break that down for you. What that means is that they're doing all of this with taxpayer dollars. We're sending all this money over there and we are subsidizing this transfer of workers and more wealth to Israel. Our people in the United States are not benefiting from this at all. And again, I don't care, what color your meat suit is. You could be white, brown, Asian, whatever. If you've got some tech skills, you're losing your gig. Okay? It's all going over to Israel, and we're paying for it. Our tax dollars are paying for it. This guy, Paul Singer, has created a hedge fund. Paul Singer recently took over a majority share. He's a big hedge funder, this guy. He took over a majority share of AT&T. He has a major holding position inside of AT&T. And what did AT&T do? They just bought CNN. Think about that for a minute. Now, Paul, I'm going to read you a little bit more. So it's not just the purchase of CNN. Donald Trump, by the way, is applauding that. He's saying, great, maybe we'll get rid of the fake news. But what I'm about to read to you, and then you understand Paul Singer, you understand his group, and then you understand AT&T and communications and surveillance and tech and the whole 9 yards, it'll make your head spin. All right, let me get back to this. I'll read a little bit more. So, the massive transfer of the American tech industry has largely been the work of one leading Republican donor, billionaire hedge fund manager Paul Singer, who also funds the neoconservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, the AEI. AEI is where they cooked up 9/11 people. AEI in the Brookings, in Ginza, that is where they cooked up 9/11. The Islamophobic and hawkish think tank Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, the Republican Jewish Coalition, the RJC, and also funded the now defunct Foreign Policy Initiative. Singer's project to bolster Israel's tech economy at the U.S.'s expense is known as Startup Nation Central, which he funded in response to the global boycott, divest, and sanctions BDS movement that seeks to use nonviolent means to pressure Israel to comply with international law in relation to its treatment of Palestinians. So Rich Dude says, fuck you. You guys are going to divest, I'm going to invest. This project is directly linked to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who in recent years has publicly mentioned that it has been his deliberate policy to have former members of Israel's military and intelligence units merge into companies with local partners and foreign partners in order to make it all but impossible for major corporations and foreign governments to boycott Israel. So what they're doing is they're nesting everything and they're linking it all up. So if you boycott Israel, you're basically boycotting your core services. Cable television, cell phones, computing, all the data processing, PayPal, whoever it is. If you're going to go in, everything's going to be so interconnected and linked together that they're basically creating kind of a Hadrian's Wall around the BDS movement. Singer's nonprofit organization nonprofit, so he can run this thing tax-free, has acted as the vehicle through which Netanyahu's policy has been realized. Via the group's close connections with Israeli PM and Singer's longtime supporter for Netanyahu, the Likud party, with deep ties to Netanyahu, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, that's AIPAC, and controversial tech companies like Amdocs that spied on the U.S. government. This Singer-funded organization has formed a nexus of connections between the public and private sectors of both the American and Israeli economies, with the single goal of making Israel the new technology superpower, largely at the expense of the American economy and government, which currently gives $3.2 billion in aid to Israel annually. Okay, that's just the top. That is just the top of the iceberg on this whole thing. This thing goes so deep, so deep. There's a connection with the infamous, paramilitary unit. What is it? The 6200 group 6200, 8200. It's group 8200. It's Unit 8200, which is part of Talpiot. Unit 8200. It's like the Manhattan Project of the Israeli tech industry. What they did is they took the best and brightest minds of the IMF. People have computer skills who are smart, and they said, you're going to be an elite intelligence unit. And they just train these guys and train these guys and train these guys. And what's really interesting is that they use these IDF kind of training models for these startups as well. And so what happens is that when you get thrown into the deep end working for 8200 or one of these 8200 affiliated groups that are connected to all these tech companies, you're given tasks that are kind of, significantly above what you're able to do. But these companies force you, because that's part of the IDF sort of ideology. And they force you, and then the ideology is also blended into this nationalistic identity that you're doing this for the good of Israel, that you're doing this for the good of the Likud party. You're doing this to preserve our national heritage, that you're on the front lines of basically protecting our sovereign identity. That's why people like Steve Bannon and Breitbart love Israel, because they're the neocons and the Likudis. They have this embedded in their system. They are fiercely nationalist. That's why they like them. That's why there's links to them. I'm not promoting it. I'm not saying that I'm applauding it. But you have to understand that, they're going to go, number one, with where the model is, and number two, where the power is. So if they want to start their own version of nationalism and get people off their fucking couches and invested in something bigger than themselves, they're going to have this theoretical national model, or its nationalist model. And right now it's becoming this hybrid, this fusion of American nationalism and Israeli nationalism. We've talked about this before. But it's really, you put the two together. Like so if you put what's happening with Minnesota and the refugee class and the Somalis and other groups of people who come in and they don't integrate, they have no desire to integrate. They're being given white glove treatment. They have pretty much everything they need to have a low level kind of subsistence and not have to work. I mean, this does happen, by the way. And that's not to say that some people in that community can't raise themselves up. And, look, I don't want to put everybody under, one rubric or one kind of blanket generalization, because that's not true. We're humans, and we have the opportunity to evolve and to grow, connect in with the light within, and lock onto that thing like a tractor beam. It's there. It's available to all of us. Okay, I'm just telling you that there are people in the system, and the system enables the people, and they do what they do. Okay, and that's what's happening for the most part in Minneapolis. But they're coming at sort of this piece around, I wouldn't say it's the bottom third, but they're coming up into the sort of moving into this kind of lower middle class area, and they're creating disturbance and even demoralization. Meanwhile, coming down from the top, through people who say, well, I'm going to go to college and, I'm going to study tech and I'm going to get a good tech job. Now you got all these companies that are basically going, okay, we're going to go to Israel because it's the best and the brightest and we don't have to pay as much. And these people will fucking work, 14 hours a day because, they're basically been trained by the IDF in order to get the job done. Oh, don't we want that? We're going to get more productivity for that. So now, of course, there's this squeeze that's taking place. And again, it's not a color thing. It is not a color thing. Because if you're an engineer and you see that that's happening, your job is getting snatched. But the bigger issue here, is the interconnected relationships at a very high level. And this gets us into the tech sector, which, by the way, is business. The tech sector, even though the 11th house represents the internet technology, the tech sector is still a 10th house operation. And so when they embed themselves with politicians or with groups, with ruling parties, now we have, again, this model with Pluto and Capricorn, where government and business merges into this kind of monolithic structure. And that's what we're staring down. And unfortunately, the people of this country and the West, for the most part, we've just been asleep. We've been asleep. We've been asleep at the wheel. And it's really, when I read that article last night, it's deep, man. I'm gonna put the link in the show page. We've just been asleep at the wheel, and people are waking up now, and you're going to be waking up into. It's kind of like, let's say somebody chloroformed you, okay? Let's say somebody chloroformed you and put you in the middle of some railroad tracks, and you woke up, and all of a sudden you heard the rumblings of this high-speed bullet train coming down this railroad track, and you wake up and you've got a matter of moments to get out of the way. And then you've got moments to somehow get on the railroad, get on that train, and somehow stop that train. And you're alone. That's kind of where we are. And who knows, maybe you see what's happening, you like it. Maybe if you're pro-enterprise or pro-free market, but that's not a free market. Not when they use American tax dollars in order to subsidize their transition. Not when they have nonprofits and they don't have to pay taxes. People talk about, well, they should break down, they should do antitrust against Google, and that's just, that's not going to do anything. Sorry, it's not going to do a damn thing. Nope, not going to do nothing. What they need to do is they need to look at the more complex relationships that are taking place at a much higher level with the tech companies, with Israel. Unfortunately, I mean, again, look, I could be talking about the Philippines, or somebody would say, well, what about China? Well, China's in the mix too. We haven't even gotten into China. You see what's happening here? I mean, what's taking place is that this whole process we've abdicated. We've totally abdicated our position. And why? Because we ran around and we got seduced by cheap shit, plentiful liquor, huge distractions, led around by our wanton libidos, worshiping false idols. I mean, we've just been asleep and led astray. And we're waking up now into a reality that is very sophisticated at a very high level. And, it's to me, when I read that article, it was just a and again, I know this stuff, and we've been untangling these things. When you read that article, it's the most important article you'll read all year. You've got to read it to understand the scope of this thing. It's massive, absolutely massive, and it ties right into intelligence and surveillance too. That's the other part of the story. That is the other part of the story. Ultimately, through our taxpayer dollars, we are paying for our own virtual handcuffs. Okay, just think about that for a moment. It's a lot to unpack. Let me check with you guys, chat room. Don't have a lot of time left here today, but I do want to get your take on what I've been talking about today. What do we have? I would openly welcome an exit tech industries to work in here in the Bay Area. Craft beer all the way. I did a raw food cleanse, reset my body's digestion. America, now like Juarez, Mexico in the late 70s. Mary was walking her dog. Let's see. Anything else here? Any other comments? I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot of info that I laid on you guys today. Neon project in Saudi for sure. Playing into, yes, the Neon, the new city of the world. Absolutely, absolutely. All right, listen. I'm going to put the link to the story into the show page. I was in the tech industry too, Michael, and you know it's dirty. It's a weird place. I get it. But at the very least, you know, you go in and you can make some money off it. Now you're not making any money off it at all. Now you're going to trust a government, theoretically, which was just caught spying again in Washington, D.C. So we're going to get, oh, you're spying? Okay, we're going to give you our tech industry too. Not a big deal. And just make sure that I get my payout, I get my gated community, and, you know, I get to order in from DoorDash. All right, I'm out of here. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart say what's possible. Hang strong. I got a few spaces left for the events. I got to close it down by Friday. That's when my rooms get cut off by Friday. So if you want to attend the event, robertphoenix.com, Hill Country Harvest Moon. It's there. It's happening. Come, please. It'll be a good time to meet, hang out, press the flesh. Everybody gets real. All right. I'll see you guys later. Have a great day, and don't despair. All right. We're waking up. We're waking up. We're having our Neo moments. All right. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.